Let me call the June quarterly meeting of the Tennessee Board of Regents to order. Actually, it's the committee meetings. I apologize. We will have several committee meetings. However, prior to officially starting those committee meetings today, there are a few announcements I would like to make. First of which is I want to thank the Southwest team, particularly Dr. Essex and the Culinary Arts program for the tremendous lunch that we were provided, and as part of that, I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the Tennessee Technology Center, Mr. Ragnar, and the support that your team and you provided for our lunch. But it was excellent meal, and while I've been here on the campus, I will acknowledge you never cease to amaze me in your ability to rise to the occasion to outperform the prior expectations that I already had for you. So Dr. Essex and team, many, many accolades for the work that you're doing here. As we looked around, I have not seen any external local officials that we need to recognize, but I do want to acknowledge, given the fact that our meetings are webcast, that we appreciate the support that we receive from the various elected and community leaders as it relates to not just Southwest and Tennessee Tech in this area, but the entire Tennessee Board of Regents system, because without their added support, it would be extremely difficult for us to do our job. As part of the opening announcements, I would like to acknowledge, as you are aware, at each of our committee meetings on the various campuses that we will have these meetings, we have faculty and student representatives from the local community sit in on these meetings, and if there are comments that they would like to make, they are welcome to do so during the course of our meeting. And one of the first things I would like to do is introduce those individuals who are with us today. We have to my right and your left, the first of which is Mr. Todd Blankenbeckler. Mr. Blankenbeckler has worked at Southwest Community College since 1998 and is currently an assistant professor of information technology and faculty senate president. He holds an MS in geography from the University of Memphis with additional graduate hours in management information system and computer science to balance his technical mapping and data analysis focus in geography. In his time at the college, he has served as program coordinator for the Geographic Information Systems Program, accessibility coordinator for distance education, and in his current position in information technology as lead faculty for web technology concentration. He also serves as ADA mentor for the Regents Online Campus Collaborative and assists with the development of an elaboration tool on the Regents Online degree courses and training. We appreciate your being with us today. Next to him, we have Maya Atkins. Ms. Atkins received an Associate's of Arts degree in Sociology, an Associate's of Science degree in Business Administration, and a General Education Certificate from Southwest Tennessee Community College. She is the recipient of the 2012-2013 Community College President Scholarship. Mrs. Atkins' achievements and accomplishments includes a spotlight article in the October 1999 Defense Reutilization Marketing Service, a 2012 spotlight article in Southwest 2010-2011 Annual Report, and a 2012 spotlight article in the Southwest Source newspaper. Also, she has earned a Joint Service Achievement Medal, Joint Meritorious Unit Award, and a National Defense Service Medal, as well as being a wife and mother of 7 children. Certainly, we appreciate you taking the time to be with us today and commend you on all of your accomplishments, and most importantly, being the mother of 7 children. Next, we have Ms. Tanya Brayton. Mrs. Brayton is a senior level instructor for the Business System Technology Program at TTC Memphis. She earned her bachelor's degree in business administration from the University of Memphis, majoring in information technology. In addition, she is industry certified as a master certified Microsoft Office specialist. As a 2009-2010 Maxine Smith Fellow, her project focused on technology and education. She is an active contributor to the TBR eLearn mobilization program, a group in which members test and review current emerging technologies, Web 2.0 methods, and app-based technology and its potential impact impact technical education. By the way, you will hear more about the mobilization project during the Chancellor's report tomorrow. Locally, Ms. Brayton contributes as a Skills USA mentor, and we appreciate and thank you for being with us today. Next, we have Mr. Michael West. Mr. West is an aviation student at the TTC Memphis. His first experience with aircraft was growing up on the family farm and being around crop dusters. In 1998, Mr. West earned a certificate in heavy maintenance for PT6 turboprop engines. In 2011, he decided to get an airframe and power plant license at the TTC Memphis. He received his airframe license in April 2012 and was hired by Andrew Bettis at the Memphis airport as an aircraft mechanic responsible for the maintenance on Lear jets. He is scheduled to graduate from the TTC Memphis with both the airframe and power plant license in September of 2012. Mr. West, thank you also for being with us today. At this time, our official order of business, we will have the Committee on the Tennessee Technology Centers, followed by a meeting of the Committee on Finance and Business Operations, then the Committee on Personnel and Compensation, Committee on Academic Policies and Programs, and the Committee on Business, Community, and Public Affairs. The first committee, that being the Committee on Tennessee Technology Centers, is chaired by Regent Fran Markham. Members of the committee are Regent Markham, Regent Copeland, Regent Griscom, Regent Kisber, Regent Montgomery, Regent Weeks, as well as Regent Varlin, who is unable to be with us today due to illness. At this point in time, I turn the podium over to Regent Markham.
Thank you, Vice Chair. This time I'd like to call the Committee on Tennessee Technology Centers to order. And a point of personal privilege, I'd like to thank Dr. Essex for hosting us today. And Dr. Essex, I would like to tell you that I took time to take the wonderful tour of your facility, and found the students very engaging and the faculty who took me around wonderful. They were engaged and so entertaining, and the facility is beautiful, and they're so proud of this institution, and I share your pride and their pride. Thank you. At the first item on our agenda, we have an award presentation by the Tennessee Road Builders Association. I'd like to call on Vice Chancellor King to provide information about the award and introduce our special guest.
Thank you, Chairperson Markham and honorable board members. I'm kind of looking through Ollie Otter here as I see you. So, good afternoon. This award is given by the Tennessee Road Builders Association to the Tennessee Technology Center for an academic year's outstanding service to the Ollie Otter Child Restraint Program. I think this is the third year with this award, and the Ollie Otter program is sponsored by the Tennessee Transportation Development Foundation, a nonprofit group established by the Tennessee Road Builders, and the TRBA Ladies Auxiliary. The program is an effort to increase awareness about the importance, very important, using child booster seats and seat belts. At this time, I'd like to introduce my dear friend and friend of this system, Mr. Bo Roberts, who is also the managing partner for Netcom LLC Nashville, to make the award presentation and introduce his special guest. Bo?
Thank you, James. Thank you, Chancellor James. Appreciate that, and it's good to be back with the friends at the Board of Regents. You probably all heard the story about the breakfast of chicken, of eggs and bacon, and who is the most committed, the chicken or the pig. Well, when it comes to commitment to this program, I'm not sure which one you would be, but I think you're closer to the bacon than you are to the egg, and so we appreciate it. I think your involvement is something that a lot of you are aware of, and some of you may not be. But it started with President Bob Bell introducing Carol Coleman and I to the Business Media Center at Tennessee Tech, and they are the ones who actually administer this program under contract and do a wonderful job. You'll hear more about them in just a bit. Then we were in touch with our friends at the technology centers, and with the leadership of several. The technology centers voted unanimously, as the directors did, to support this program and again, be involved, not just say we're going to support it. But they purchased an Ollie costume on their own. They did all kinds of other things you'll hear more about in a little bit. To make this program go, we have nearly and maybe just over 1,000 volunteers throughout the state. Every one of those volunteers have taken a course at your Regents online program, to a nonprofit, non-paying course, unfortunately, but I think they can pay if they want to get some credit for it. But anyway, every one of them have had online training to be a volunteer in this program, and that's some of the involvement that we have had with your institutions and with your system. And without it, and without those elements that I've mentioned, this program would have not have succeeded anywhere near what it has today. So we thank you for being a little bit of the bacon, a lot of the bacon, frankly, in this program. And a lady who is the inspiration of this program, and it was her passion that started it. I call her the little lady from Livingston, Carol Coleman, who is the current chairman of the Tennessee Transportation Development Foundation, the foundation of the road builders, is the lady who still remains the inspiration and driver behind this program. It's my pleasure to introduce you again to Carol Coleman.
Thank you, Bo, and thank you for allowing us to come again today. The Tennessee Road Builders are so proud to have launched this program to make a difference in the lives of Tennessee children. We're pleased once again to appear before the Board of Regents. As you probably are aware, automobile accidents are the #1 cause of injury and death to children in the ages of 5 to 14, twice the amount of cancer and diabetes. I don't know if you were aware of that. But with the wonderful assistance of the Board of Regents and the Governor's Highway Safety Office, this program has received many, many amazing results. And at this time, I'd like to introduce you to Julie Brewer, who is from Tennessee Tech, and she is the manager of the OLLI program. And Julie does a fantastic job to manage this program, and she's a wonderful person. And at this time, I would like to introduce Julie so you can meet her today. It's going to fall.
Good afternoon. I appreciate the opportunity to come and address you all. One of the things that I'm not used to is speaking to grown-ups. I speak to kids more than I speak to grown-ups, so this is a little new experience for me. This past school year alone, the technology centers from across the state were responsible for presentations to more than 30,000 school children from the age of 5 to 9 years old across the state. That means they spoke to and influenced 30,000 children to make good decisions when they become grown-ups and they start leading the next generation of kids. That impact alone, I can't say enough. I mean, that's a third of the reach that we do every year. Without the Technology Center involvement, that's one less touch, one less reach we're going to have into each community. And that's statewide, so all 95 counties have access to the OLLI program, and hundreds of volunteers come from the Technology Centers, and we're very, very thankful that they are there to participate with us. To honor the TTCs for their commitment and dedication to community awareness and safety and seatbelt travel, all that kind of stuff that happens right in their own community, this award presents them with, a big thank you from the bottom of my heart. I have 4 children. I love them dearly. I make sure they're seated. And when they have friends that ride with us anyplace, they may not be seated, but my kids are sure to tell them, have you heard OLLI? Have you met OLLI? This is what we do. And this is how we're safe in the car. On behalf of Tennessee Tech and the Governor's Highway Safety Office, I really appreciate the opportunity to come and present this award to some of the most outstanding activists for seatbelt safety in the state. I'm going to introduce Carol again. I really thank you for your time on my behalf, and she's going to introduce some more friendly folks over here.
Well, to honor the 3 finalists, I'd like to call to the front of the stage 2 representatives of our Tennessee road builders. The board of directors, one of the members is Hal Wilford. Hal, will you come stand here with me? Hal is with Lehman Roberts Company here in Memphis. And Patty Sparks. Patty is a member of the Ladies Auxiliary, and she has been with the OLLI program from the very beginning. And Patty is from Nashville, and she is a member of the Tennessee Transportation Development Foundation. And of course, how could I leave out OLLI? So now, this year's most active in effort and support of the program are the technology centers at Paris, and as you can see on your board here, the technology centers at Jackson and the technology center at Newbern. Would you all please come to the front of the stage? Do you have a representative here from each one of these? Now let's look at their accomplishments. Paris had 9 school plus presentations with 1,824 children reached. Jackson had 9 plus schools with 2,660 children reached. And Newbern had 10 plus schools with 2,170 children reached. So today, I would like, Ollie, would you come help me present the award? So as you can see, all were major contributors to this past school year. All joined with their colleges statewide to give amazing support for the safety of the children of Tennessee. And I am so happy for each one of these and all their efforts and all of their presentations. And of course, we're so happy for Ollie today. Ollie, you want to stand by me? Okay. I lost my notes. But we want to thank the Board of Regents for allowing the Tennessee Road Builders to participate in this meeting today. Thank you so very, very much.
Thank you so much. We appreciate all you do for the children of our state. At this time, I think we want to take a photo. No, we'll do it later. Okay. Vice Chancellor King.
I think that's Dale Sims in that outfit. I don't see him anywhere. Oh, okay.
That was wonderful. Okay.
But Carol, we want to thank you and Bo and the road builders for the great job that you do as well. And, you know, I thought it was interesting to notice that when you looked at that slide had, beside the Road Builder Association, had our online program, had Tennessee Tech, had a Board of Regents symbol, and the Tech. So it is a true TBR system collaborative to do this. And I want to applaud those other entities as well for a job well done. So let's give them a round of applause.
Excellent. The next item on our agenda is a presentation on the Tennessee Technology Center's Outstanding Student of the Year program. And I'll ask Vice Chancellor King to give the highlights of this program and introduce the 2012 winner.
You know, there's no doubt some of you have truly firsthand experience as judging this and difficult aspect, but I do want to take the opportunity to share the latest news about this exciting program implemented a few years ago, the Outstanding Student Program of the Year, if you remember. The purpose of this program is to select an ambassador for technical education in Tennessee to share the value of technical education with as many citizens in the state as possible and hopefully beyond the state boundaries. The program gives an outstanding TTC student the opportunity to tell their story of how technical education has changed their lives and open doors for them while at the same time developing leadership skills. The program includes an extensive nomination, application, and interview process at the local, regional, and state levels to determine the statewide winner. During the selection process, each student is required to make a presentation on the impact of technical education in their life. This year's statewide winner was selected from 6 finalists and announced at the 2012 Tennessee Skills USA Conference on April 24th. All 6 finals were outstanding students and had their own unique story. You know, we had the opportunity this year to have 4 regents as judges, and I want to say they earned their pay. I think they should vote yourself a raise, double your salary for doing that. Anyway, but we had Regent Markham, Regent Roddy, Regent Reynolds, and Regent Griscom, and as well with folks from the Department of Labor and a representative from Chattanooga State Community College as well. So, and I think you can attest that it's a difficult job. This year there were 6 finalists. It was interesting when this program started. We were originally going to all have 6 finalists each year. The first year there were so many good students we couldn't narrow it down to 2 from each region, so we had to have 3. So we ended up 9 finalists. The second year we couldn't even narrow it down to 3, so we had 4 from each region, so we had 12. So because it's tough to find a cut line because each have their own unique story. And you're not dealing with apples and apples. You're dealing with apples and oranges. You have students could be 19 to 54 in this process with their own unique story. So it's a fabulous process. This year's 6 finalists were Miss Sarah White from Crossville, and I think their pictures are on the screen. Patricia Savory from Elizabethton. Miss Danielle Latham from Livingston. Ms. Teresa Rucker from Memphis, Mr. Travis Enlow from Murfreesboro, and Mr. Greg Patrick from Ripley. And at this time, it's truly an honor to have Mr. Greg Patrick from TTC Ripley as the 2012 Outstanding Student is to tell his story. Mr. Patrick, could you come forward, please?
First of all, I would just like to say thank you for allowing me this opportunity to come forward and tell you this about something that happened to me, about an institution that's near and dear to me. And I'm going to just tell you a little bit about myself first, and then I'll talk a little bit about what the Technology Center means to me and what it's done for me. The picture earlier didn't have me with my glasses on, so I'm pretty sure I was just looking out into space and somebody just said smile, and I smiled. I couldn't see anything, I'm pretty sure. My name is Greg Patrick. I am from Halls, Tennessee, which is in Lauderdale County. Lauderdale County includes Halls, Ripley, and Henning, Tennessee. The technology center that I attended is Ripley Technology Center, and which is only about 10 miles from my house, so it's very close, close-knit rural community. I'm a father of 2 wonderful kids. I've been married for 20 years, and also I'm an honorably discharged veteran. So I've had the job that I worked before coming to the Technology Center. I'd worked there for 20 years. This was manufacturing in the printing industry, and it was a really good job, really good company. Actually thought that would be the place that I would retire. Worked very hard there, worked to become a supervisor, and the way was pretty set. I was on night shift. I had a couple of gentlemen who were supervisors on days who were getting close to retirement. I said, things are set. You know, I'm looking at the hot tub, you know, behind back. You know, we're making plans. And then things changed. The market, the economy kind of turned on us a little bit. The printing industry was hit very hard by the internet, smartphones, those type of things played a big role in that. And magazines are a tough sell when things start getting tight and people have to start backing off on what they spend. It tends to be things like that. So we all understand why things happen. Things happen. My situation is not unique. There are tens of thousands of Tennesseans who just recently have gone through the same thing that I went through. What we have to decide is, what are we going to do when we're faced with those tough situations? I was faced with a situation where I had to look at certain factors. I was married, 2 kids, one in high school, one in junior high, mortgage, those types of things. And when the job goes away, those bills that you have, of course, they still keep coming. So we had to make, my wife and I, some smart decisions. What are we going to do in the future? What are we going to do go ahead? What am I going to do as for my career going forward? The choices I faced were to stay in the printing business and to leave Tennessee, because printing in Tennessee was done. There was no more printing in Tennessee. So I was faced with that factor, to leave a state that I have roots that go way back, that I love, and that really wasn't an option for me. Leaving Tennessee, I couldn't see that. That wasn't an option. So the other thing is to go out and find another job, start over again, nothing wrong with that. But there was something that I wanted, and what I wanted was a career. I wanted a trade. So that was the avenue that I chose to go in. I started to look for places where I could get the training that I needed, something that I could learn that would increase my career, that would make me a better employee, that would improve my skills, that would put me in demand. You know, printing I was great at making magazines, but there weren't any more magazines to make. So what do? I looked at something that I was very interested in, which is electricity. I've always had that in me, the want to see how things work, to take things apart. As soon as something breaks, my wife's going to throw it away. Let me have that. I want to take it apart, see how it works. So that was something that was very interesting to me. So I looked at different places that could provide that for me, and one of the places that I looked, and I'm so fortunate that I looked, is the Tennessee Technology Center at Ripley. I met a really wonderful instructor who, after a few minutes of talking to me, and he picked up on it, the fact that I had that interest. And he said to me, he said, you know, you can take this class, and if you study hard, you can be a licensed electrician. You can have a skill. You can have a trade that's going to last you, you know. And that made sense to me. So after careful planning and consideration with my wife and looking at how we could make these things work, and to be honest, a lot of help. There were certain programs that were there for us, for a displaced worker, that made all of the difference in the world. I simply could not have done what I needed to do without those things. The Technology Center at Ripley actually changed my life. It absolutely did. And it's been playing, the Technology Center has been playing a part of my life for a long time. But for me to go from a displaced worker and within 15 months to be certified for industrial electricity, for construction electricity, and have a residential license to practice electricity in the state of Tennessee, wow. I mean, that's going from one end of the spectrum to the totally other end of the spectrum. That's going from being out of demand to being in demand. I had a job 15 months after I was laid off. I wasn't even out of school completely, and I had a job. And I had a job with a company in the community, right in my own county. And the people who hired me, Marvin Windows and Doors, I am very proud of that company. They allowed me to be here today. They're so wonderful. They've allowed us to do so many things. They've been a part of this for me. They've come to the Technology Center and celebrated with us. Technology Center has benefited a lot from that relationship with them. My manager is always in communication with the director and the instructors at the Technology Center. That's the type of relationship that we have to improve our workers who are losing their jobs daily and who are coming out and they're saying, what am I going to do? I don't want to see any more of my friends leave Tennessee. I'd like for them to stay here, but I want them to stay here, get the skills that they need so that we can succeed. The Technology Center has truly been a blessing for me. It's been wonderful. I can't say enough about Mr. King, my instructor, Mr. Bill Ray, my coordinator, Ms. Ruth. Life is good. Because of what I did with the Technology Center, they believed in me. I believed in them. I'm happy to answer any questions that you all may have. I talk about the Technology Center a lot. It gave me my life back. I can never thank them enough for that. Before I go, I do want to tell one story. My manager asked me to post the pictures of our accomplishments on the bulletin board at work. And since I've been doing that, people have been coming to me and saying, how can I do that? What do I need to do? And I'm happy to tell them every time, go to the Technology Center. See what they have to offer. I guarantee you, you will not be disappointed. They gave me my life back, and I can't thank them enough for that. Thank you very much.
Mr. Patrick. Mr. Patrick, we are very proud of you, and you will make a wonderful representative for us across the state as you take your story to everyone this year. We're very proud of you. I would like to give an opportunity for any of the regents who served on the committee, the selection committee, to say anything. Mr. Chris? Good.
I would be glad to do that, and it's great to see you again. Very good to see you. One of the great experiences being on the Board of Regents is to do what we did several weeks ago, and that was to be able to listen to 6 young people tell their stories about how the things that this state offers through higher education really can have an impact and can change a life, can put somebody back on track, can help somebody realize that when you lose a job, it doesn't all end. You have an opportunity where you can pick it up, learn something new, and be productive again for yourself, for your family, and for your community. It also, you hear stories of people who felt like at some point as they were going through school, they got lost couldn't find their way. And that all of a sudden somebody reached out to them, talked to them about the technology center, they got in there, and they're back on track. For those of you who didn't have the opportunity that we had to listen to 6 really compelling stories, and as Vice Chancellor King said, it was not an easy decision because everybody who came in there was well prepared. They shared with us a story just like Mr. Patrick shared today, and then they took a bunch of questions from us that they didn't know what we were going to ask. But at the end, you'd be proud, and I hope all the technology centers that were represented by those 6 students are proud of the way that these participants, these contestants, present themselves and represent the institutions where they are in school, where they've got an education, where they've now become productive. So it is good to see you again. I want to make one other point, though, because we also had the opportunity, Fran, as you know, after we did the judging, to then go over and see the competition that was going on with the various skills for the Skills USA. And again, to look at and watch the crafts and the work and the skills that were demonstrated in that room across a range of things that are taught in the Technology Center. For me, I found it very informative, but also a great way to understand all the things that we're doing. So thank you. I mean, I enjoyed the opportunity. I hope I can do it again. And again, it is great to see you and to hear your story again. It's just as compelling today as it was when we heard it a few weeks ago. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Very good. At this time, I believe we'd like to take a picture, if you will indulge us just a moment. Chancellor Morgan, Mr. Patrick, Chancellor King, Bill Ray, Ripley Director, and Ruth Cohill. And is your employer here? Oh, he wasn't able to make it. Okay. I think that's everyone. And the judges, Howard, Tom, is Emily here? Greg and Greg. Where do we want to stand? Where are we going to do this? We're going to meet you. There's another camera right there. Thank you. Oh. Yes, Vice Chancellor King, would you mention what he won?
Yes, that's what, by the way, before I mention what he won, that what Greg failed to mention, that his lovely wife that I've had a chance to meet a couple times is a graduate of the TTC in practical nursing as well. So and he has truly going to be an excellent example. And I do want to applaud the TTC directors because they believe enough in this program that we honor the outstanding student with a new vehicle. And in Lauderdale County, Greg is affectionately known as the man who won the car. So he does. So he's going to earn that car because we're going to have him speaking somewhere every chance we can. And I think he'll represent the board quite well.
Thank you very much. Thank you and congratulations. The third item on our agenda is the consent agenda item, which is proposed program terminations, modifications, and new technical program implementations. This information was included in your materials that were mailed to you. You've had the opportunity to review this item and background materials. Does anyone find reason to remove this item from the consent agenda before we vote? If no one wishes to remove any items, do I hear a motion to accept the items presented under the consent agenda?
So moved. Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. The next and last agenda item is informational reporting, which includes the annual program review report for year ending August 31, 2011. This information was also part of the packet that was mailed to you. Does anyone have any questions for Vice Chancellor King regarding this report? Hearing no questions, this concludes the report for the Committee on Tennessee Technology Centers. If there's no further business to come before this committee, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
All in favor? Adjourn.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Markham. That concludes the Committee on Tennessee Technology Centers, and the next meeting is the meeting of the Committee on Finance and Business Operations. Members of that committee are Regent John Farris, who is the chair, Regent Griscom, Regent Rhoda, Regent Roddy, and Regent Getz, as well as Regent Reynolds, who is not with us today. If those members would come forward, would appreciate it, and we will begin the agenda for the Committee on Finance and Business Operations.
I'd like to call the Finance Committee to order, please. Chris, if you'd call the roll.
Regent Farris.
Here.
Regent Griscom.
Here.
Regent Rhoda. Here. Regent Roddy. Here. Regent Gatz. Here. You have a quorum.
Thank you. The first item on the agenda is review of the consent agenda. Consent agenda items being presented for approval are as follows. Minutes from the April 30th and May 24th, 2012 special called meetings of the Finance and Business Operations Committee. Approval of proposed revisions to the following policies. First policy is policy 4020501, naming buildings and facilities and building plaques. Second policy is policy 4030300 on general travel. Does anyone want to move any of these items off of the consent agenda and discuss them separately? If not, is there a motion to approve the items on the consent agenda?
So moved.
Thank you, Tom. Is there a second? Rich, thank you. Is there any discussion on the motion? Then this just requires a voice vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? The motion carries. The next agenda item is approval of the minutes from the June 12th, 2012 special called meeting of the Finance and Business Operations Committee, recommending approval of the maintenance fees and tuition for 2012-2013 fiscal year. And as everyone remembers, this is something we've had a lot of discussion about, a lot of meetings about, and I appreciate the staff's hard work that they did on tuition and fees this year. and appreciate all the members and the time that they've put in on the committee, studying all the numbers and the figures. So is there a motion to approve those minutes? All right, Regent Gatz makes second. Thank you, Howard. Is there discussion on the motion? Anyone want to discuss this? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. We got a roll call. I'm sorry. Didn't take me long to get off the script. Go ahead, Chris. Right. Call the roll.
Regent Ferris?
Aye.
Regent Griscom? Aye. Regent Roddy? Aye. Regent Gatz? Aye. Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is approval of funding for operations for the 2012-2013 fiscal year. This time I'd like to call on Vice Chancellor Sims for his presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. You're moving along pretty well. I'll accept a motion to approve right now if that's in order.
Well, we noticed you changed clothes rather quickly.
That Ollie outfit is a little warm. That was not me. That James made that up. That was not me. Today, under board policy, we have essentially 3 budget cycles: a proposed cycle, a revised cycle, and an estimated cycle. The action that we'll ask the board to take today is on 2 of those budgets: the proposed budget for next year and the estimated budget for the current year, which is the final budget that we have for a year. A little bit of description: what is an estimated budget? Again, this is for the current year, the year that ends June 30, which is Saturday. So we're right at the end of our fiscal year. This budget is the one that takes into account enrollment changes for the full year, can fully encompass any changes in state funding and any changes in tuition and fee adjustments, as well as expenses that come along with increased or decreased enrollment. So this is the budget that we will then use to compare our actual expenses at the end of the year to and determine variances where we were over or under budget. The next, the proposed budget is essentially, got a little anxious here. The proposed budget is essentially the budget for next fiscal year. Some of the features of that budget are some of the things that we don't know, maybe is what I should say. We don't know the full impact of enrollment. We're getting some information currently about admissions and enrollment, but we won't fully know that until later this fall. The state budget, as a second item, passed earlier this year, but we're still receiving final adjustments from state government as to the allocation of those appropriations among our institutions. Grant activity, various revenue types of activities are not fully known at this point in time. So the proposed budget, by its very nature, is somewhat preliminary, but it is the legal action that's required in order for our institutions to have authority to expend funds in the new fiscal year. The next one that is really the pretty pie charts. Always are asked, well, how is the money generated and how is it used? So what we try to do with this chart is show you our major funding sources, where those funding sources come from, and then generally how they're used. So this gives you some feel for such as sales, services, others. Where does that come from? Service assessments, athletics, interest income, and how is it used? You can see it's used really for a variety of activities throughout the institutions. The same for our fees and appropriations, the character of the funds that we receive in under that category and how it's spent. We also, other categories, restricted funds. Restricted funds, a big number in the system, a little over $869 million, and next year generally comes, substantial amounts, I should say, come from the federal government, primarily in the form of federal financial aid, although we do have endowment income and essentially transfers from endowments, from our foundations, from restricted giving by individuals to the institution. These, although there are certain amounts of this money used for instruction and research and public service, the lion's share of it, as we'll see in a few minutes, is dedicated to scholarship or financial aid activities. Auxiliary funds, generally you're talking about housing, parking, our bookstore operations, food services. Those are where those dollars are generated. They are spent for those purposes. There's a requirement that an auxiliary enterprise has to at least break even, including all its costs. So those costs are essentially set aside to balance the revenues against. Looking at our revenue picture, again, you'll see a repetition here of pie graphs and then a chart following and then more pie graphs and more charts. They're all set up the same way. You'll have on the left side the estimated for the current year, our final budget for this year. You'll have the proposed for next year on the right-hand side. This one, the takeaway on this one is not a surprise to anybody. Our tuition and fee revenues in both of these years are the lion's share of our funding in terms of what is unrestricted. Kind of a history lesson. I think Dr. Rhoda and the Chancellor would echo this. If you looked at this 30 years ago, the numbers for state appropriation tuition fees would be reversed. So we have seen a gradual, maybe accelerated over the last few years, but a gradual shift of funding for our operations away from state government and towards student tuition and fees. The next page just shows you kind of a table that presents the same information. We do see, I think this is the first year in the last 4 that we have some growth in our state appropriation number. Those dollars are primarily driven towards salary policy to cover the 2.5% salary increase as well as benefit costs, but there was an amount of general operating dollars as well that were provided to the system. Mr. Chair, I'll say if people have questions, they can stop me as we go through this.
Well, I notice you've got an increase showing in state appropriations for this coming year. I'm wondering maybe how you got that.
Yeah, and that is primarily from salary policy. The 2.5% COLA resulted in somewhere around $17 million system-wide. You'll recall that we had a 2.1% budget reduction and then a 2.5% improvement in general operating dollars that were related to outcomes. The net of that was around $900,000 is my recollection. So that makes up that $17 million roughly. There are some other things in there, retirement benefit costs, group insurance premium rates that state government offers partial funding for.
Can I ask you, Dale, this is the first year to get results off of the Complete College Act. Can you just quickly sort of share with us, from your perspective, what came in? Did we hit the targets? Did the state pay for hitting those targets? And what impact that's had as you look here, and then what you can anticipate in the years ahead?
It's a great question, and I wish I had other charts and tables in front of me here. What we did see was a funding improvement that was dedicated solely to the results, was distributed solely as a result of improvement in outcomes. The total dollar amount across all of higher education was in the neighborhood of $28 million. For our institutions, I believe it was $14 million or so. Dollars solely from those outcome numbers, and that was driven by improvement in outcomes. Now, in all candor, it recognized the production and outcomes. It did not recognize essentially the increased cost in some respects of producing those outcomes. The formula itself takes into account salary growth in the Southeast. That was really not factored into that improvement in that additional outcome funding, but we did get recognition of that. Regent Griscom, you'll probably painfully remember my presentation at the March meeting. We went through a whole series of line graphs for universities and for community colleges by outcome, showing the last 4 years what that's looked at. Where do we have momentum? And I think we're all happy to see that by and large we have positive momentum in every one of the outcomes that are used as the basis for our funding, and have no reason to believe, based on anecdotal information, that we'll see any deterioration of that, at least in the short term. So again, the move to fund those outcomes, I think, was an important move. The downside to it in some respects was the fact that institutions lost money through state appropriation reduction. The action that you've just recommended to the board, on the other hand, would restore that state funding reduction. So our institutions essentially, it's not entirely an accurate statement, but are being largely rewarded through board action and the governor's recommendation, the legislature's adoption of the budget. They are being largely rewarded for their production of outcomes over the last 3 years for the growth in that production. I hope that's... if there aren't any other questions then on the revenue picture, we'll take a look at our expenses in a couple of different ways. First, by functional area. This gives you an idea of how much we're spending of our budget, how much is spent on the instruction function, as well as other functions, O&M, operations and maintenance. That's basically taking care of the buildings, just general operating cost. Institutional support are administrative type costs. You could view that as. Student services includes things like health clinics, recreational facilities and opportunities for students, as well as athletics falls into that category. Academic support is essentially support of the academic or the academic mission. It includes things like libraries, those sorts of things. Public service research, I think those are probably self-explanatory, as are scholarships. Share of budget, if you looked at this 10 years ago, you'd be looking at roughly the same shares of budget. So no significant shifts in this budget year in terms of those activities. Comparing the estimated budget, which is the last budget for the current year, to next year's proposed, you'll see some shifting around there. A couple of, I think one word of explanation, research, you see on a percentage basis a pretty significant adjustment there. Traditionally, I think this is a long-standing practice, about half of that reduction is at the University of Memphis in research, and it really is driven by when the budgets are submitted in April to us, that they haven't formalized the split of faculty time between instruction and research. So this number usually jumps back up in the October revised cycle. So there's, from the standpoint, is there a reason to be concerned about diminution of the research mission across the system? I don't think that that should be an issue here. Other than that, the adjustments are generally a result of institutions being somewhat conservative in terms of their budgeting practice in this initial budget cycle. The next graph, this is something, Mr. Chairman, I think you've asked me about at various points in time in the past, and others have. How we usually show our restricted dollars just as a lump sum of restricted funding. Well, how does that play out across the expenditure categories? What this chart does is take on the left-hand side our unrestricted funding only and show how we budget that across the functional categories. On the right-hand side, we show, once you include restricted sources of funds, how that money's distributed. The thing that you'll immediately see is that scholarship number goes from a little over $64 million when you only look at unrestricted to over $680 million when you combine restricted and unrestricted. Basically, 3/4 of our restricted funding is dedicated to student scholarship activities. A primary driver of that, I guess I would say three, primarily federal grant activity, Pell Grant activity, lottery scholarship activity, and then the TSAA grants that TSAC provides on a need basis. There are also substantial shares of funding from institutional scholarships, et cetera. But that is really the big change that you see when you compare how does that restricted funding impact our overall spend.
I think we have one question.
Yes, ma'am.
Go ahead.
I had one question on your expenditures by function fund. You made a comment about student services that it comes from the different local universities and community college levels. I want to know why it decreased by $9 million. What was the reasoning behind the $9 million decrease in student services?
Yeah, and we'll look at that in a minute. That is usually driven by a reduction in travel expense. This initial budget is usually, they usually under budget travel because of uncertainty about what action may take place with the state budget. I probably ought to step back and make sure everyone understands. Our institutions have to develop these budgets to submit to our office in early April. Well, that's before the state budget's finalized. We have had several discussions by that point in time with the Finance Committee about what may be in the works in terms of maintenance fee adjustments, but we're by no means to a point where there's any certainty there. So they're trying to be conservative with that. So I think that that's largely explained through reductions in travel and in some respects operation and maintenance funding, probably understating in some respects what supplies they'll be buying, what equipment they'll be purchasing in the next year, knowing that they're able to replace that if their enrollment holds up, if the state budget comes through the way they expect it to. Great question. So you've got a picture, or this, the last chart gave you a picture of that restricted, unrestricted, how much our budget is influenced by those restricted dollars. The next chart, we look at natural classification, basically purpose, and you see that, in both years, substantial amount of funding is in human resources. Right at 70%, a little over 70% one year, a little under 70% in 1 year is all about salaries and benefits. So we're a large, as a system, large institution primarily focused on human resources in terms of our spend. Next chart, and I think this kind of responds to the question that was just posed. When you look at the estimated budget for the current year and proposed budget for the next year, you see that travel spend is down by 26%. That's a big percentage number, but in dollar terms across the system, $8 million. And then your operating budgets are down $68 million. So I would suspect that student services number, again, is largely driven by that as opposed to any reduction in human resources in that area. If there aren't any questions, the next chart is about transfer activity. These are transfers into various funds that each institution maintains. I think most of them are self-explanatory. Retirement of indebtedness. These are funds where when an institution has borrowed money through the school bond authority primarily, we're required to actually fund that debt service through retirement of indebtedness transfers, so this reflects that. Unexpended plant, these are dollars that can be committed toward improvement of physical facilities, renovation of classrooms, those kinds of things, activities that occur on a regular basis on every campus. Renewal and replacement, primarily about equipment, making sure that we're in a position to renew equipment on a regular basis. Other is essentially that 7 or 8 items in other, none of them significant in and of themselves, and as a group, not material in terms of the total picture. I should say these are planned transfers. Whenever you get to the end of a fiscal year, these numbers will look significantly different. I was reading his mind.
Yeah, it's scary.
We've been together a long time.
All right, Mr. Chairman, if you will, I'm taking a risk here. This is something new, a new piece of information for you this year. Every year we talk to you about our budgets and we talk to you about them being balanced. This is a chart that shows you that we are in balance when you take into account all of our resources, including beginning balances and ending balances. I can walk down through it, but you see as a system we have beginning balances within our unrestricted E&G funds of about $62 million. That's somewhere around 3 to 4% of our total expenditures, which is not a healthy amount, is not a surplus amount, but it's a reasonable amount given the scope of our enterprise. What we've done is then following that summarized unrestricted E&G, we show you the revenues, the expenses, and the transfers within that category. You can see for unrestricted E&G, we're actually spending $4.4 million more than we have revenues for, which would act as a reduction in those beginning fund balances. For auxiliaries, you see the same picture, but we gain a little there. We are not fully budgeting all the available revenues. And then in total, I should say this does exclude restricted. In total, in terms of unrestricted E&G, we have revenues that are short of expenses by about $3 million. That $3 million is less than 3% of our total spend. You should be aware, why are we comfortable with that number? The reason we're comfortable with that number is, as a system, practice varies from campus to campus, but we generally do not budget what we refer to as lapsed salaries. So if we have vacancies, we don't take that into account in setting our budgets. We assume every position is filled for every day of the year, and we know that that, in fact, won't be the case. We also assume that in our spending plans that we will spend 100% on every purpose that we've budgeted, and we know from history that that will not happen. So we're comfortable that this $3.3 million reduction in our budgeted reduction in those balances is an appropriate thing. I should say as well that that practice is, I believe, is consistent with practice you'd see in state government. They count their reserves as resources at the beginning of the year. Some years they add to those resources. Some years those resources act as a true funding source. I would say you should also be aware that there are reserves outside of the general operating account that can always be called on in case of emergency as well. So again, at the risk of presenting new information that might raise questions, just wanted you to be aware that we do believe the budgets are balanced the way that we consider these budgets.
Thank you for the new chart, new information.
That is primarily Regent Kisber asked me to string this presentation out so he could take a longer nap. The next page, authorized positions.
Jonas, would you like to respond to that?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I'm in the short rows here. Authorized positions. The next two charts show you our authorized positions for the current budget, and then the next chart shows you the positions within the budget for next year. A little over 17,000 positions when you consider both unrestricted and restricted funding sources. It does reflect a slight decrease in the number of positions. There are several explanations for that. One, by way of example, MTSU has recently outsourced their bookstore operation, which results in a decrease in the positions at that institution. So we have a variety of activities such as that occurs. If there aren't any questions there, last slide I've got is really the recommended action. And this essentially incorporates the numbers that you've just looked through, and the numbers that you've just looked through are a high-level summary of the 30 or 40 pages of detailed budget information included within your board books. This summarizes your staff's recommendation as to the budget action for both estimated 2012 and proposed 2013. Before, Mr. Chairman, I again try to respond to questions. If there are any, I need to thank, again, recognize Assistant Vice Chancellor Renee Stewart. Renee, wave your hand. Renee's a little shy, but she and her staff do a great job working with institutional staff. Need to also thank the institutional staff. It's a pretty big operation in terms of accumulating the budgets from all the institutions, working issues with them, and developing this for the board. And our thanks do go out to institutions, and mine go out specifically to Renee. With that, Mr. Chairman, the roll call vote would be required to approve the budgets as submitted.
So this will be a motion to approve 2012 estimated budget and the 2013 proposed budget.
Correct. As
presented by Vice Chancellor Sims. Is there a motion on that?
I'll move it.
Thank you, Regent Griscom. Is there a second?
I'll second the motion. Regent Roddy.
Thank you, Howard. Is there any discussion? Anyone want to have any more discussion on the motion? If not, Chris, if you call the roll.
Regent Ferris?
Aye.
Regent Griscom?
Aye.
Regent Roddy?
Aye.
Regent Gatz? Motion carries unanimously.
The final item on the agenda is approval of the recommended new policy 4010010 regarding community college resource allocation plan. And I again call on Vice Chancellor Sims for a presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we've talked about this on several occasions. As part of the Complete College Act, one of the major changes financially within that act, in addition to the outcome formula, was that our community colleges, this next year, for the first year, there will be one line item appropriation for community colleges. Historically, that had been a separate line item contained within the state budget for each community college. What that results in is the board needing a method to distribute these dollars among the community colleges. At the Chancellor's request, we put together a working group composed of 3 of the community college presidents, 3 academic officers, 3 business officers, several staff members from the central office, as well as a representative from the Higher Education Commission. That group met on several occasions through the summer and fall of last year. They developed the draft of the policy that is before you, that was circulated through the sub-council process, was submitted to the community college presidents on several occasions. It was an iterative process. It would be submitted, comments received in, adjustments made, and then we would recirculate. The policy that is before you today is the work product of that group and of that process. In essence, it respects the allocation methodology that's embedded within the outcome formula. It provides a mechanism, however, to also fund system-level initiatives so that there is a funding source for activities that are related to creation and maintenance of a unified system of community colleges. It also holds out the prospect of creation of a source of funding to reward collaborative activities between community colleges. That piece in particular requires subsequent action by the board and by the staff and the community college system. This policy is before you for your approval today. The budget that has been submitted and that you've just acted on was based on distributing dollars to community colleges using this methodology.
How much would go into this fund based on what we just did?
It's 0.5% of the state appropriation, and my recollection is that is about $964,000. And I should say that source of funding is being used to support the Vice Chancellor for Community Colleges office. It has been used to support the branding activities to brand the community college system. So it is a source of funding for those joint kind of activities. Mr. Chair, you've given me a chance to talk a little bit more about this, so I will. One of the other things that it does is it creates a source of money. If an institution, if an employer locates in a certain area and needs a certain program to be established, this creates a source of money where an institution can come to and utilize this money, potentially utilize this source of money for the startup cost of that kind of program, so that an employer that has a need in a given area we have the ability to maybe respond in a more expeditious fashion to those sorts of needs. So again, it creates this pool of money to support joint activities.
Okay. Any questions so far? Is that it? Is there any more, Dale? Or?
No, sir. It comes to you with the recommendation of staff for approval. I think, I'm looking at Chris, I think it's a roll call vote.
This roll call? All right. Is there a motion to approve the proposed new policy regarding community college resource allocations? Thank you, Howard. Second? Second by Regent Gatz. Commissioner Gatz. President Gatz. All right. Is there any more discussion about this item? If not, Chris, if you call the roll.
Regent Ferris.
Aye.
Regent Griscom.
Aye.
Regent Roddy.
Aye.
Regent Gatz. Motion carries unanimously.
All right. Thank you, Dale. That completes our agenda for today. Does any member have any other business to come before the committee? If not, committee's adjourned.
Thank you, Regent Farris. That concludes the agenda for the Committee on Finance and Business Operations. Next committee meeting is the Committee on Personnel and Compensation. Regent Montgomery is the chair of that committee. I would ask that the members of that committee come forward. In addition to Regent Montgomery, we have Regent Farris, Regent Kisber, Regent Markham, Regent Copeland, Regent Roddy, and Regent Varlin, who is not here.
Right here? Okay, I'll make more of these. I'm respectful. How you doing? Good. Good afternoon. Detecting the presence of a quorum, I'm calling the Committee on Personnel and Compensation of Tennessee Board of Regents to order. The first item is the consent agenda item. The committee has previously reviewed the following items, and I will repeat these here. The approval of the President Emeritus contracts, approval of the proposed revisions to TBR Policy 5-1-1-7, which is sick leave policy, tenure and promotion recommendations at the universities and community colleges. D, tenure and promotion recommendations at the Tennessee Technology Centers. And E, review of faculty promotion increases. Like I said before, materials provided under the consent agenda have been previously provided to all of us of the board. After the review of these materials, does anyone see any cause to remove any item from the consent agenda as presented? If there is none, we will proceed with a motion to accept these items on the consent agenda. Do I hear a motion to approve? Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye. All opposed, like sign.
I'm sorry, I'm going to need a roll call.
You gonna need a roll call vote? Okay, it's fine. Madam Secretary, roll
All
call,
right,
please.
okay, thank you, I'm sorry. Regent Copeland, Regent Ferris, Regent Kisber, Regent Markham, Regent Montgomery,
Aye.
Regent Roddy. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, the second item. The committee will now review and consider for approval the institutional requests for new and amended compensation plans submitted by Cleveland State Community College, Columbia State Community College, East Tennessee State University, Middle Tennessee State University, Northeast State Community College, Pellissippi State Community College, Southwest Tennessee Community College, Tennessee Tech University, University of Memphis, Tennessee Technology Centers, and Central Office, which includes the Central Office staff, the executives, the presidents, and the center directors. The committee will now hear a presentation about this group, and I will call on Vice Chancellor Sims. Come forward, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With the committee's permission, Assistant Vice Chancellor April Preston and I are going to kind of double team this. I can only absorb so much material at one time, so I've given her the hard part to do. Just a little background. I think most members know that each of our institutions under board policy is required to maintain a compensation strategy, a compensation methodology that essentially sets the parameters for compensation on their campus. It's essentially an effort to define what the market for various positions might be, and to develop a strategy about how close to that market number they can get to and how they get to it. So in this cycle, in the June board meeting cycle, is the period of time on our compensation calendar where institutions can bring requests for adjustments to their existing plans or for new plans, to submit new plans. And as the chairman has noted, today you have a pretty full agenda of those. I should say that also that the next cycle, our September board meeting cycle, presuming that the committee and board act favorably on these plans, these institutions as well as other institutions in the system will be in a position to request board action in September to implement in whole or in part their compensation strategies. Whatever the board has approved, they can come forward with plans on how to implement those. That is, in many respects, is very similar to an exercise that state government goes through periodically where there is funding for market studies. This year, the administration recommended something in the order of $500,000 to conduct a market study of key positions in state government. And then there's the equivalent of $30 million on an annualized basis that has been appropriated to implement the results of that study later this year. So our process, somewhat similar to theirs, try to find what the market is for positions and then develop a strategy as to how to move toward that. So that's the effort today, is to present to the committee the methodologies that have been submitted by our institutions, respond to questions along the way that members might have, and then ultimately, if the committee is comfortable with the methodologies, to have those recommended to the board, and then the board act on those so the rest of the process can work its way through. Should emphasize action today in terms of adoption of methodologies does not trigger any salary adjustments. Once again, those would result in specific board action during the September board cycle. Mr. Chairman, with that as introduction, what I'd like to do is turn it over to April to walk the members through the institutional request. Once she finishes with that and is able to respond to questions that members might have, I'll come back up and talk to you about our presidents and directors.
Okay, as she comes before, come please. I'm reminded that the last study was in 2007. The last update was in 2007. We also have the consultant here with us today, the center group, and we have Mr. Myers with us today, so he's here if we have questions of him as well. So we have the full team here, so thank you very much. April?
A cross-functional committee within the central office reviewed the proposed plans for methodology, market data being used, equity, consistency, completeness, and clarity. There are 11 compensation plans submitted for your review and approval. 3 of the plans are proposing increasing the rates for faculty promotion. 2 move the existing salary ranges to adjust for cost of living adjustments. And 6 are proposed new compensation plans. Of the 11, 9 are for schools, 1 is for the TTC staff, except for the directors, and 1 is for the central office plan. The central office compensation plan is composed of 4 components: central office staff, central office executives, presidents, and TTC directors. The staff plan was last updated in 2007 with the help of the Center Group. This proposed plan refreshes the market data and confirms internal alignment of positions. The market sources that were used this time include the College and University Professional Association for Human Resources, or CUPA-HR, Economic Research Institute, Comp Analyst, and PayScale. Those last 3 are compensation databases, and they're scalable by location, the nature of the organization, the size of the organization, and job content. The central office staff salaries lag the market by an average of 3.1%. The current plan, the one that's in existence today, included 2 different salary structures for the central office staff, one for the IT staff at 100% of market, and one for the rest of the staff at 95% of market. In the proposed plan that you have before you today for the central office staff, we're proposing one plan of 95% of market for the non-executive staff. If there are any questions on the central office staff compensation plan or the school plans, I'm happy to address those at this time. Otherwise, I'll turn it back over to Vice Chancellor Sims to discuss the presidents and directors.
Any questions? Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'll now go briefly through the plans for presidents and directors. Would emphasize again, as the chairman has noted, that this is not an activity that the central office does on its own. We always retain an outside consultant, and the Center Group is the group that has performed this work on the central office's behalf, as well as with the presidents and directors. The groupings in terms of university presidents, where we looked at in terms of market comparisons, really focused on equally blending 2 factors or 2 groups. One, the peer institutions that each one of our universities have. We researched, or Joel on our behalf researched the salary levels for presidents at those peer institutions. We also used, again, the national databases to determine for the Carnegie classifications of our institutions, which are national classifications, we determined what the average salary were for presidents of those institutions. Those numbers were then equally weighted, and that arrived at essentially a market for our presidents. As noted on the slide, in the information provided in your board materials, our presidents currently on average lag the market by 23%. There's somewhat of a range around that. We have some that are as high as almost 30% behind the market, some as low as 18% behind the market, but a pretty nice gap below market for our university presidents. The current plan that we're operating under shoots to fund, or the target is 90% of market. We would maintain a 90% of market within this proposal going forward. So as to the university presidents, we looked at peer institutions. We looked at Carnegie classification, which is consistent with how the funding formula looks at our institutions, and developed this market approach, and the salaries continue to be targeted at 90% of market. In terms of community colleges, I think we're consistent with past practice here. We looked essentially at the size of institution as indicated both by their budget and their enrollment, again using the same databases that we've discussed previously. Our community college presidents are closer to market than our university presidents. You can see that the average lag there is just a little over 9% to market. The range there is anywhere from right at 2% under market to almost 14% under market. We would again continue to, the report recommends that we continue to target a 90% of market as a target salary for our community college presidents. In terms of TTC directors, again updating a 2007 study for this group as well. We used 4 factors there, again primarily geared toward size and scope of the institution, enrollment, budget, number of employees, and number of programs. The TTC directors had an average lag of about 9.3% behind market, with a range of 0 to 22% behind market, so a little bit greater spread there. Consistent with the plan for the presidents at universities and community colleges, the plan that's being presented would recommend that we fund them at 90% of the market, that be the target salary. Mr. Chairman, if there aren't any questions on that, I think the next aspect of the plan was an overview of central office executives, and I believe that you are going to manage that.
That's correct. At this time, are there any other questions that we have? Yes.
Okay, I want for clarification. So based on what he was saying is that the proposal is to move the plan from 95% of the market to 90%. Is that basically what he's saying? On some of these, he wants to scale it back a little, decrease the income from the different.
I think that will be detailed more later. Okay.
Oh, okay.
We'll answer your question more later. Okay. Thank you.
What's the cost of
Mr. Chairman, first of all, we haven't queried the institutions. The 10 institutions that have submitted plans, we don't really know what the impact is on them, and we really haven't gone through the exercise of developing a specific cost on that, on the remainder of it.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to ask Mr. Myers if you come to the microphone, please, and kind of share with us about the method, where we are as a system, and try to respond to the 95% scaling back to 90%, why that's okay to do that.
Sure, Mr. Chairman. Actually, there was no change from the previous plan in terms of the 90 and 95%. The office staff, central office staff, is now and has been at 95%. That's been the target relative to market. And as it has for the executives and the presidents, that's been 90%. So there really isn't an adjustment in terms of the target. We did the market pricing at 100% of market, and those were the figures and the percentages that Dale talked about. And in order to scale it back, it was really to develop an implementable plan. And the approach going forward would be as we fund to 90%, then we consider moving to a higher target. But it's kind of an evolutionary implementation or evolving plan from there.
Other questions? Here's your opportunity. Yes.
Actually, I do have a question. The presidents and directors are classified as being part of the central office funding. Now, in a traditional sense, funding for any type of improvement on the compensation plan is based on available funds within the institution. One of the problems that I think occurs as part of this is that then there's a disconnect between the presidents and directors getting compensation increases when the institution, the faculty and staff may not. How do you account for that, or is there any, plan for trying to make sure that, I guess in a fiscal sense, that if an institution has the funds, then both the president or director along with the employees get similar movement paths in the compensation?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I'm stepping up, Mr. Chairman, if it's okay, because
Right,
that's not a methodology. That is more of a why has it been this way. Right. First of all, I think that we try to be sensitive. Let me back up. Historically, I have not been here during a period of time where we have moved presidents' salaries. Like most staff, presidents, other than the cost of living, have not really received adjustments over the last 4 years. And I do know that that has been a question as to movement of president's salaries versus other staff. A couple of points I'd like to raise. Most of the compensation plans that we see for faculty and for other staff are geared toward funding at 100% of market. Not everyone, but most of them are geared toward 100% of market. I believe that's correct. I think it's important to realize that what we're talking about for presidents and directors is, in some respects, a little bit of inequitable treatment from that respect, in that we're saying the market is here, and for a variety of reasons, consistency with history, in some respects affordability, sensitivity to impacts on campuses, their target is a little bit less. So I think that is a partial explanation for that. The affordability is always an issue. On a campus, implementation of the comp plan is always subject to available funds on a campus level. As recommendations are fashioned on implementation of any of these plans, including the executives, there will be a sensitivity to what is the availability on campuses in terms of what impact does it have. Mr. Chair, if I could also, just as a clarification, question about moving from 95% to 90%, you are accurate. We are, but that is only for the central office executives, which would include the vice chancellors and direct reports to the chancellor. So it's a group of 10. If you'll give me 10 people, I think, is what we're talking about moving. And the reason for doing that is it creates consistency with the central office executive staff and the recommendations that are being made for presidents of community colleges, universities, and TTC directors.
Okay. Can any other community member have any questions at this time? Regent Roddy.
Dale, I would just ask you, I presume then institutions that have funds available, particularly where presidents lag by 23%, I presume then the institutions that would have the funds to fix that inequity could propose that in their budget. Those that didn't may have to implement it over a couple years.
Yeah, and Regent Roddy, great point. I think the next item of business is discussion of a compensation strategy over the full system that embodies the ability of institutions to make requests to the board in September. So I think we'll be touching on that. In terms of central office executive and presidents, though, that is really a matter that will be a topic of discussion for at least the next few months in terms of how do we move in that direction. But you've got the spirit of it. There will be a process that we'll go through to try to develop recommendations on that.
Thank you.
Again, this is a concept we're talking about at this point in time. Only concept only. At this time, pending any questions, is there a motion to approve the new and amended compensation plans? I'll move. Is there a second? It's been moved and second that we adopt the new and amended compensation plans. Madam Secretary, we call the roll, please.
Regent Copeland. Aye. Regent Ferris. Aye. Regent Kisber. Aye. Regent Markham. Regent Montgomery.
Aye.
Regent Roddy.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you very much. The third item, the committee will now review and consider for approval the system-wide salary increases. Vice Chancellor Sims.
Mr. Chairman, I know you'd rather look at Assistant Vice Chancellor Preston, but I just can't help myself.
I know.
This, consistent with the practice last year, at least, and I think for many years before, the board sets a compensation strategy, a framework for institutions in terms of, for the next fiscal year, developing compensation recommendations. And that's the purpose of this item today. Just to touch on a few items, components of the plan, and I should say this has been, again, an iterative process. We have had numerous conversations with the presidents, solicited their feedback on the broad parameters of this strategy, and have made adjustments to the strategy in response to their feedback. The first important item is that the state, the governor and the General Assembly agreed to fund a 2.5% cost of living adjustment. And consistent with that, the proposal before you is that the board would adopt that, or we would recommend the board adopt that as its strategy in terms of a cost of living adjustment. It would apply to persons whose performance has been satisfactory and would apply to all eligible employees. we would, consistent with last year's action as well, we would suggest or recommend that there be a minimum $750 payment made. So individuals would be eligible for a 2.5% increase or $750, whichever is greater. Essentially meaning the break point there is an annual salary of $30,000, as I recall. I would note for the members that we received communication from at least one organization, the United Campus Workers, that had asked that we consider recommending to the board an equal distribution, essentially taking whatever monies were available and dividing it up among employees and everyone receive an equal share. We're not recommending that today primarily because of concern that that would run contrary to the language in the State Appropriations Act, which appears to direct that there be a 2.5% cost of living adjustment to every employee. Short of that, they'd asked that we consider a $1,000 minimum versus a $750 minimum. In some respects, Mr. Chairman, the recommendation to stay with $750 is a question of affordability. Increasing that minimum amount by that $250 increases cost across the system by almost $2 million. While this was occurring at a point in time where we had already essentially had conversations with the Finance Committee about tuition policy, about fee recommendations, and we just didn't feel that at this point in time, at this late hour, it was warranted to make that adjustment. We're also recommending, and I think with the concurrence of institutions, that this 2.5% be given to employees effective July 1 and be paid on the July payroll. The next element, and Regent Roddy, this I think is responsive to your request. We're also providing authorization for institutions to develop and submit to the board requests to use institutional funds to further implement their board-approved compensation strategies. They would be able to do that without limitation. You may recall that last year we essentially had a provision that limited, I believe it was no more than a 2% salary pool to do this. We've removed that in our thinking this year, so institutions, depending on availability of funds, will be in a position to develop a request to the board that they think best fits their institutional need. A second element of that would be a one-time payment would be permitted in recognition of performance. There'd be a $1,000 cap is what we're suggesting on that. We have included the word performance-based in here. We haven't specified exactly what that means. We're, again, leaving it up to institutions to develop a plan that is best responsive to the circumstances on that campus. Campuses, in terms of their performance management systems, the way that employees are assessed, they vary in depth and in scope, and for that reason we were reluctant to outline a specific performance benchmark on this. So we're essentially leaving it up to management of each institution to develop a plan if they have funding for this feature, but a plan that would recognize performance in some way, shape, or fashion. Again, the process on this is assuming that the committee and the board concur in this strategy, the process would be institutions would develop proposals. They would be submitted to the central office. They would be reviewed through the central office, and some discussion take place with campuses about the features of plans. And then in September, we would be making recommendations to this committee and further to the board on what portions of those plans we would recommend be implemented. Mr. Chair, I'd be glad to respond to questions that members might have on this proposed strategy.
Any questions? I have a question about the bonus. The intent target group, is that for those who have exemplary performance, not just satisfactory performance? That's the intent?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think that clearly when we outline that it needs to be performance-based, the intent is that it needs to recognize performance. We have not limited it, though, to exemplary. Okay. We are leaving it up to institutions to self-define that.
Okay. Okay. Okay, you've heard the report of Vice Chancellor Sims. Pending any questions, is there a motion to approve the system-wide salary increases? So moved. Is there a second? Okay. You want to second it? Yeah. Come on, Commissioner. Kisper. Okay, this requires a roll call vote as well. So, Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Regent Copeland. Aye. Regent Ferris. Aye. Regent Kisber. Aye. Regent Markham. Aye. Regent Montgomery. Aye. Regent Roddy. Aye. Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you. Next item, fourth item, is the committee now will review and consider for approval the proposed revisions to the presidential search process. At this time, I'll call on Chancellor Morgan for comments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Just to give you all an update, I think Chris is prepared to answer questions about this as well. As you know, the law changed this year to permit us to, to make a change in terms of the availability of public information relative to candidates or applicants for vacancies, both in terms of the chancellor as well as the presidents and directors of the institutions. In essence, what the law does is it allows an applicant to request that their information remain confidential until a point in time where they become a finalist. The law requires that once the finalist, and it requires at least 3 finalists, I believe, Chris, to be identified, that once that happens, there has to be a period of at least 15 days before an appointment can be made to give plenty of public notice as to who those finalists are. But if you don't become a finalist, then your information is not disclosed. The belief is, and based on the best information that we have from folks that are in the business of conducting searches, executive searches, the belief is that by applicants having the ability to inquire about and pursue opportunities, it will get potentially a significantly better pool of applicants. Someone at an institution in a role where they're comfortable, it's a good job, they are not ready to quit that job, but another opportunity comes along, it's a very difficult decision to make, to apply for, and it become public, that you are entertaining at least the possibility of another position. So this, we believe, will be a positive change. The legislature, and thanks to Regent Tom Griscom for helping shepherd this change through the legislature. The University of Tennessee was also very interested in this happening. Well, it did pass, and now we are at a point where we have to figure out how to implement this. So the basic change is that the meetings of the search advisory committees, historically we have treated those as open meetings, even though I'm not sure that the statute necessarily required that. In fact, it probably didn't, but that's the way we have approached it. But in order to now comply with the statute, to the extent applicants choose to request that their information remain confidential until they become a finalist for the position, we're really no longer in a position to have open meetings in that same fashion. So the change that's being contemplated here would simply recognize that and allow us to go forward on search advisory committee meetings, respecting the confidentiality in those early stages of the search. Chris, is that a fair summary?
Yeah. Excellent.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to add, and the Chancellor did an excellent job in giving an overview of this matter, but I do think it's important for those who are here and those who are listening in to understand that the true intent of this legislation, and I commend Regent Griscom for helping shepherd this process through, but the true intent was to ensure that for major positions, we as members of the region are getting the best qualified applicant applying for these positions. And the point I really wanted to emphasize is that I commend the media for working with us because they were supportive of these changes in Tennessee statute, because they realized that it was, at least on its face, having the potential of limiting the pool of applicants that we had to consider for various presidents and chancellor positions. So the key issue is this was a measure that, good, bad, or indifferent, it was on the books. We all realized it was having an unintended consequence on our ability to attract competent individuals for considerations, and I commend, as vice chair, the role the media played in helping to get this measure approved, as well as our colleague, Regent Griscom. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You've heard the report by Chancellor Morgan and the clarification by Vice Chair Duckett. Pending any questions, do I have a motion to approve? So moved. Is there a second? Okay. Moved and seconded. This item requires a roll call vote? No. It does? Okay, all in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. This concludes our agenda for the Committee on Personnel and we have one more? We have one added item. Oh, I did. We did. Okay, one other item. The committee will now hear a recommendation from Chancellor Morgan and approve interim vice chair position for academic affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think, as you all know, Vice Chancellor Paula Short has given us her intent to resign her position as of the end of the fiscal year. So this is her last week. We are fortunate to be able to come to you with a recommendation that we appoint Kay Clark as the interim Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs. I think y'all all know Kay. He's been around for a long time and is very capable of maintaining the forward momentum of that office, and we are very fortunate indeed to have him available for that purpose. So I would recommend to you that you approve the appointment of Kay as interim Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs.
You've heard the report of Chancellor Morgan. Is there a motion to approve? Is there a second? Second. Does this require a roll call vote? All in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. This concludes now our agenda for the Committee on Personnel and Compensation. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Is there a second? Second. The Committee on Personnel and Compensation for the Tennessee Board of Regents stands adjourned.
Thank you, Regent Montgomery. With the conclusion of the Committee on Personnel and Compensation, the next committee that will hold its meeting is the Committee on Academic Policies and Program. Those members are Regent Bob Thomas as chair, Regent John Ferris, Regent Lee Getz, Regent Huffman, who is not here with us as of yet, Regent Reynolds, who is not here, Regent Rhoda, and Regent Weeks. If you would come forth, we will set the table and we'll conduct that committee meeting.
Good to see you. Nice job. Nice job.
Fine. supper tonight. Very nice of your employer to treat us. I understand the governor's going to be there.
Oh, that's all right. Yeah, we'll. Sure. Okay. All right. I've got to explain to them I moved one of them too.
I would like to call to order the meeting of the Committee on Academic Policies and Programs. I will ask our Madam Secretary to call the roll, please.
Regent Ferris? He's here somewhere. I'll count it. Regent Gatz? Regent Rhoda? Regent Thomas?
Here.
Regent Weeks? You have a quorum.
Thank you. I'd like to now, we have only one agenda item today, and I would like to call on interim vice chancellor to be, after the approval tomorrow at our board meeting, Kay Clark. Dr. Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. And I'm still in the role of Associate Vice Chancellor today, and it's an honor for me to be here to propose these programs on behalf of Dr. Short, because they are all degree programs that she championed, and it, I think, symbolized her emphasis on reform and innovation during her decade or plus at the Board of Regents. There are 6 degree programs, 3 of which are collaborative programs that involve multiple community colleges, and I'll explain that when we get to that point. The first of these, though, that we have to propose is a Doctor of Education degree at Middle Tennessee State University. And the degree is in Assessment, Learning, and School Improvement. The very nature of that degree, by stating that emphasis, sets it apart from what we might consider a traditional EDD degree in administration, leadership, or pedagogy. This is truly an innovative degree that would train school leaders to who would know how to manage data, retrieve it, and make decisions based upon data, and that will be increasingly important in an age of accountability. Dr. Short asked that I personally thank Dr. McPhee, the president of MTSU, for his work in this, and also Provost Brad Bartell and the Dean of the College of Education, Lana Sievers. This is I don't know if it's a unique program in the United States, but it's one of the few that emphasizes data management. So this doctorate degree would be a milestone for the Middle Tennessee State, and it'll be a hallmark for their College of Education if we approve it. And I didn't say this, but I assume I should go through all of these and then come back.
Yeah,
or
let's just go through all of them, then we'll take questions.
All right, thank you. So this holds a lot of promise for MTSU, and I'll be happy when we get to the end to see if you have any questions. Oh, I did want to say this too. Dr. Short gave a sentence that she would like to be read here, and I'm, again, pleased to do so. She says, "I am convinced that this degree will serve a critical need in preparing those who have the knowledge and unique skills to improve K through 12 schools so that these schools graduate students who are college ready. This is a major mission for MTSU as an institution and TBR as a system, as its institutions are deeply engaged in improving K through 12 teacher preparation through the Ready to Teach program. MTSU is to be commended for the quality of this proposed degree and for its commitment through the implementation of such a powerful program to join our K through 12 partners to meet the race to the top goals for the state." And the external evaluators who looked over this were very commendatory of the program. Now, as I mentioned, we have 3 degree programs involving collaborations in some fashion from the community colleges. Some were collaboratively planned, others will be delivered, and the AFA degree will be a unique offering, which I'll explain in just a moment. The first of these programs is an AAS in health sciences that involves the community colleges that you see in front of you there: Chattanooga State, Cleveland, Columbia, Nashville, and Pellissippi. This program was developed collaboratively among representatives of these institutions with assistance from the board staff. And this degree builds upon a model that we already have with an Associate of Applied Science in General Technology, whereby students who graduate from a technology center or other institution of similar nature and have a diploma can be awarded up to 30 semester hours toward a degree by then completing general education components and some elective courses. This one builds upon that model, but it is a more specific degree offering in that it is health sciences. And this would mean that students who attempt to take advantage of this program would have completed the equivalent of 30 hours in some kind of health sciences program, and then they could fashion this toward a degree at the community college. It meets the goal of increasing credentialed people. It will allow us to students to have credentials that perhaps could aid them in their job goals and so forth. So the important thing, though, again, is I think in the vanguard of what we'll see in the future, a collaboration among institutions. So that is in health sciences. Now I'm departing from a little bit from the book to go to the next AAS program, then we'll go to the AFA. The next one is an Associate of Applied Science in Criminal Justice. Now this involves a little bit different type of collaboration in that it will be collaboratively delivered through the Regents Online Campus Collaborative. Now, although all 13 community colleges will participate in this, only 5 require a new degree program, but the concentrations and corrections and law enforcement will be applied to all of the community colleges so that they may take advantage of this through this collaborative. The 5 that need the degree program approved are Chattanooga State, Cleveland State, Jackson State, Montlow, and Pellissippi. Now, if these particular institutions wish to come back with online programs, then they would have to go through the degree approval process. But this is a collaboration for online delivery only, and it's a remarkable achievement, I think, in that regard. The concentrations that students could take are in corrections and law enforcement. I might note that Dyersburg and Southwest already have the corrections concentration. Now, this degree meets a high demand field. More and more we're seeing students who are interested in criminal justice, and it takes on a number of avenues that a student can take in pursuing this, and it's a high demand field, and we've seen student enrollment increase significantly. So this will, I think, offer students an innovative way to get a criminal justice program delivered all the way through a campus collaborative. The next program that we have is also somewhat collaborative, but a bit different from the other 2. It's an Associate of Fine Arts degree with an area of emphasis in music. Now, this will be designed for transfer, and it is a part of the effort that we did to develop the articulations that were required by the Complete College Tennessee Act. Music is a particularly difficult program to articulate for community colleges to the universities. The reason being, and this is a performance-based leading to a BFA or similar degree, it's a performance-based music program. Many of our community colleges have great music programs, but it's been difficult for the students to stay there 2 years and get a degree because there is a pressure on the curriculum of the 41 semester hours of gen ed, and then try to get in all the studio and performance courses that are required in music. In this particular case, the group that we work with, and when I say it's a collaboration, it was a part of the joint collaboration between university and community college faculty and all those meetings that we conducted between 2010 and 2011 to develop the transfer pathways. So this will be one of the transfer pathways. The only way we felt from that committee that we could deliver music with an adequate articulation is to defer 6 hours of the 41 hours of general education to the university and squeeze in a few more performance-related courses for music. This worked according to the committee. And so if students at the community college complete this degree, they would be eligible for entrance into music programs at universities. They will be subject to the same audition and performance assessments that native university students have to fulfill, but it puts them on equal footing to become juniors in the music program. This was required a great deal of deliberation. I was in those meetings, and everyone was cooperative, but it was difficult to achieve this agreement, not from any acrimony, but just from the sheer difficulty of getting all the courses that were needed in those areas. So we're really pleased with this particular innovation. It's a new degree, Associate of Fine Arts. It lends some prestige to that programs from the community colleges, and we think it'll be a fine addition to the academic inventory. There are 9 community colleges that are participating in this program, the ones that you see there on the screen. The next is an Associate of Science degree in Emergency Medical Services from Motlow State Community College. This proposed program will help the workforce needs for emergency medical services in Motlow's 11 county service area, particularly in the area of the Fayetteville Center where this will be housed. This is in southern Middle Tennessee. The objectives are to address the continuing education needs of non-traditional students in the rural area while meeting the community's workforce needs with qualified and well-educated paramedic professionals. This is another growing field that people are interested in. The program fits appropriately with the institution's mission and the Complete College Act of 2010 to offer pathways for increased education and workforce planning. This is an area I know that Motlow has been interested in trying to get into in a more formal way, and this would present them that opportunity. Finally, we have an Associate of Science degree from Volunteer State Community College in Medical Informatics. The proposed program will prepare students for the area of health medical informatics and will provide entry-level employment opportunities for those with appropriate medical informatics skills and competencies. Individuals, it has 2 intended possible audiences. Individuals currently employed in the IT workforce and who have appropriate skills and experience will be able to find gainful employment in the growing field of health and medical informatics. And then the graduates of this program would be able to find gainful employment in new and I've already stated that, the new and improving program field in medical informatics. With the exception of 2 part-time adjunct faculty that would be required, no additional costs are anticipated. That's a summary of the degree programs, and I'd be happy to expound on anything that you might have.
Thank you, Dr. Clark, for those thorough explanations of these new programs. Do any committee members have questions of Dr. Clark on any of these 6 new programs? Yes, Dr. Rhoda.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, the new EDD program at MTSU is exactly what I think all of us hope all the new graduate programs, well, all the new programs will be like, because it is mission-oriented and it's really fits to a niche. And I want to thank Dr. McPhee and his staff for the way they went about developing that.
Thank you. Any further questions of Dr. Clark or comments? Seeing none, this matter of approving these 6 programs requires a voice vote. Do I have a motion to approve the programs as presented? Regent Getz moved. Is there a second? Second by Regent Ferris. Is there any further discussion? If not, all in favor say so by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Any further business to come before this committee by any of the members? If not, we are adjourned.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Clark.
And thank you, Regent Thomas. That concludes the Committee on Academic Policies and Programs. The next committee will be the Committee on Business, Community, and Public Affairs. Regent Roddy is the chair of that committee. Other committee members are Regent Griscom, Regent Kisber, Regent Markham, Regent Montgomery, and Regent Rhoda. If you would come forward, please.
Good point.
Found a comfy seat over here. Yeah, I took care of that last night.
Okay. I'm good to go. I'm good to go. I don't think so. But it never happened. Oh. It was so small, I thought they were going to go down into the bar. Guess I better pull out now.
he can come under. We need to find a excellent out there. I wish we had it with us today. I'll bet y'all find one somewhere.
Who's talking about me? Who's talking about me? Dr. Grizzly?
The cleanup hitter. Bases loaded. Bases loaded. The cleanup hitter. Is everybody here? John had to run. He had to run out and make a call. All right. Let's call the meeting of the Committee on Business, Community, and Public Affairs to order. I believe we have a quorum here now. Chancellor, would you like to make any comments before we begin?
Mr. Chairman, I'll be, other than just to publicly thank David Gregory and Ginger Hauser for the outstanding job they did this year in some pretty difficult circumstances in Legislative Plaza. This was a tough year, and the next year promises to be even tougher, perhaps. But they represented us well, and I think we should be very proud of what they did on our behalf.
Let's give them a round of applause, please. The board really does appreciate your efforts, and I'm sure you're preparing for the next round. Yes. At this point, then, we'll turn it over to David Gregory, Vice Chancellor Gregory, for an update on legislation affecting higher education.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon to the members of the committee, the faculty and staff, and presidents and directors. It is my privilege to make the report on the 107th conclusion of the Tennessee General Assembly. Just kind of get us in the rhythm of where things are legislatively. Biennial legislative sessions occur in Tennessee, which means bills introduced in 1 year will lay over for another year, and at the end of that year they conclude. And so this concludes the 107th General Assembly, meaning that all bills introduced once the General Assembly adjourned are now must be reintroduced for another session in the 108th General Assembly. What I'd like to do, Mr. Chairman, if it meets your approval, there's some things you've talked about already, and so bearing that in mind and bearing that I'm last, I'll move quickly through some of the slides that you've spoken about already. But I'd like to just give you a general sense. First of all, going back to your December meeting, the legislation that you approved for TBR to seek legislative relief on how those bills were finally concluded. And then I'll talk a little bit about the appropriations bill, and then I'll talk a little bit about the bills that specifically impact higher education in general. So first, if you look on the screen in the materials that are in front of you, 4 particular bills, bills relating to teacher, getting access to teacher effect data, tenured faculty terminations, and blind vending housekeeping, all were bills that you approved and were enacted by the General Assembly, and I'll talk about each one of those individually. First of all, the teacher effect data, and this really rolls itself from the first to the top legislation and the review that is occurring relative to our schools of education. The Tennessee Higher Education Commission is in the process, is under contract, I think, with the State Department of Education to assess the effectiveness of teachers that are coming out of our teacher colleges. And in order to do that, in order for us to improve, it's important that we have access to the same data that is being seen relative to the value-added scores for students that and teachers that are in our system. So the legislation will allow colleges of education to receive the value-added data. This data is currently protected and will remain protected. It will be seen by our colleges of education. They will be required to come up with policies to protect the data, but it will be a very useful tool for our colleges of education when they see the specific data and look at their strengths and weaknesses and know how to improve the colleges of education, better prepare teachers on a going forward basis. The second piece of legislation actually came out initiated with our faculty subcouncil. And this relates to the rare occasions when a faculty member may be dismissed wrongfully, who may have tenure. And we have the way the statute was currently constructed is if a faculty member who had tenure was determined by the courts to be wrongfully terminated, they could not receive financial rewards or back pay. And so we introduced legislation. The General Assembly concurred that any faculty member who is determined in the future to be dismissed wrongfully may be subject to, not mandated, but subject to receive back pay. The next slide relates to blind vending, and the picture you see is the governor signing the legislation along with blind vendors from our various campuses around the system. We sought some clarification in this language, particularly because of the difficulty we were having with branded food services and food courts around particularly our universities. And so two things really occurred that are meaningful in this legislation. One is it will allow both our schools as well as the schools as in the UT system to be able to contract for food services like cafeterias, food courts, catering service, and those things without the blind vendor preference on a going forward basis. For blind vending, however, for each new building or campus, there will still be one spot that will be reserved for operators to have a vending machine or a counter service as needed by the campus or the school. The next piece of legislation has to do with the housekeeping bill. Housekeeping because it has multiple subjects in it, and I'll just review those briefly. There were a couple of reports you see there. Number one, a petroleum report, and the determination of necessity for telephonic board meetings. Those reports have been eliminated. And then you may also recall that last year, or maybe 2 years ago, I think it was last year, the legislature enacted background checks for those people who had access to dormitories, our residence assistants as well as people who have key access to dorms, and required them to pay for that background check. In most cases, and if not all, where we're performing background checks across our system, we're paying for that. And so we felt like it would be an equitable adjustment that we pay for those background checks for the RAs as well as the people who have key access, janitorial staff, and others. And finally, our employees receive longevity checks based upon numbers of years of service that they have serving with us. Our banner system would not accommodate a piece of legislation that had been enacted for general state government employees that would allow sort of individual choice about how to receive that check, whether separately or combined. Our banner system will accommodate one or the other, but not on an individual basis. So we sought some legislative relief that will save us from having to make about a $200,000 adjustment in our computer system for receiving longevity checks. Next, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, let me talk with you briefly, and this will be briefly because I know Vice Chancellor Sim has talked with you about the appropriations bill. It's always the biggest bill passed in the General Assembly. It's always one of the last bills to pass, and I just wanted you to see again kind of the highlighted items for the Regent system. We took our share of the 2% base budget reductions. We were rewarded with $14.9 million to fund the improvements in the outcomes-based formula and a $9.2 million non-recurring appropriation to sort of lessen the impact of the removal of the hold harmless provision. We received $17 million, as Vice Chancellor Sims told you, for our portion of the 2.5% salary increase for employees, and also an additional $2 million to fund increases in benefits for our employees. I'm proud to report, and let's just take a moment and just sit on this slide for just a minute because it's been a long time coming for many of us. This is a picture of the groundbreaking for the MTSU Science Building. The Governor, the Speaker of the House, and President McPhee, board members, Chancellor Morgan, and others are seen here at the groundbreaking. We received $107.9 million for capital outlay appropriation for the MTSU Science Building. And on the next slide, and I think I may say this to you too often, but I just want to just continue to reiterate how important some small item in the budget called capital maintenance actually is. This appropriation of $39.9 million is extremely important. It's spread out to the campuses all across the state to help with capital maintenance projects. We have 33 projects that this $39.9 million is funding, and this is a significant increase in the amount of capital maintenance that we have been receiving. You recall that Governor Haslam asked us to look carefully at our outlay needs as well as our maintenance needs, and so this represents funding of a significant increase for capital maintenance. I just don't want that to be overlooked. Also, in the appropriations bill, we received authorization for our next 5 capital outlay projects to begin planning those projects now. We are using our own dollars, the institution's own dollars, but we're trying to get ourselves in a position so that those projects are fully planned and ready for construction at next year's budget. Second installment was received on the state's acquisition of the University of Memphis Lambeth campus, $4 million. And a $1 million appropriation was made to Roane State Community College, the Oak Ridge campus, for the 3rd floor build-out of the Allied Health Building. Now, Mr. Chairman, let me move to other legislation that was of a more general nature that impacts both us and the UT system. You've heard Chancellor Morgan speak to you about Senate Bill 3751, which was the improvement in the presidential search process. Next is a bill that would allow for early registration of veterans. I think we're all aware of the plight of veterans who are returning home and finding many difficulties sort of getting reacclimated back into the main population. And so legislature asked us to provide an early system to allow returning veterans who've served honorably to be able to register for classes at our institutions. The next bill is a bill that requires eligibility verification for individuals who are receiving public benefit. And this is a bill that was enacted by Representative Carr, Senator Johnson, and it is broader than education, but it impacts education. This relates to any kind of sort of public benefit that the state would provide to where it impacts us, our incoming students. And the bill becomes effective October 1st, and the House sponsor, Representative Carr, stated it is his legislative intent that students completing the FAFSA would be sufficient to verify their status for enrollment in higher education. Next, and this is a symptom of a sort of broader, I try to represent to you some of the trends, I guess, that I see in higher education. One of the trends that we see legislatively is how do we get other teachers, other pathways into individuals into the teaching profession. The alternative license for teachers, Senate Bill 2302 by Senator Somerville, provides a means for an alternative license for people who have taught in post-secondary education to be able to teach in grades 9 through 12. The people who qualify must teach only in their subject area, and they must subject themselves to both training and participate in mentoring and complete a licensure test before they're able to teach. But there are other bills that are on this, in and around this same subject of alternative licensure. Some of them were not enacted this year, but I think they will be. We'll see those in future legislative sessions. The next slide is a bill that was passed that encourages reverse articulation and reverse transfer agreements in Board of Regents colleges as well as other SACS accredited institutions. And this, I think, is complementary to the Complete College Act, where we're trying our very best to increase the numbers of people who hold some form of credential. The next is dual credit. And dual credit, I draw a distinction between this in the sister program, dual enrollment. Dual credit is when a student in high school takes a course that has been prepared for dual credit, is able to pass a competency test at the completion of their course, and when they enroll at a post-secondary institution, at that point in time, the credit attaches to the student. This is a form of early college credit, like dual enrollment and like advanced placement and other type programs where students are gaining early college credit, international baccalaureate, I'm sorry, I couldn't get that out of my head, before they enroll in college. This is a program that, in particular, State Representative Harry Brooks from Knoxville is very, very interested in promoting. We will be working going forward with the Higher Education Commission, with the University of Tennessee system, but also with the State Department of Education Career and Technical Education Division, which will take kind of a lead role in helping to promote some of these early college credit programs. The tough thing to solve with dual credit is the ability for a student who takes a program localized and who goes in another location of the state to be able to take that program and let those credits articulate. So we'll be working towards that into the future. And then let me give you a couple of things that you probably read about, but legislation that was introduced but not passed. Sorry to report to you that one of our more important items that you had approved, the addition of the faculty and student regent, was not enacted. We got into some difficult discussions about who would be the appointing authority, and so that legislation was not enacted. What I alluded to relative to what you read about most, you probably read a lot about guns legislation, and we are seeing each and every year legislation that relates to the Second Amendment rights to bear arms. In this particular legislative session, there were two bills that particularly caught our attention. One was what was dubbed the Guns in Trunks bill that would prohibit private businesses as well as colleges and universities from prohibiting someone from coming on to your property provided that they had a handgun or any kind of weapon that they kept locked either in their trunk or their glove box. That bill sort of produced a fairly public dispute between the people who are the Tennessee Firearms Association, the pro-gun type lobbyists, as well in opposition to people who are private business owners and hospitals, and we joined that group in opposition to this legislation, and it was not passed. There's a similar but different and probably a little bit more potentially harmful piece of legislation that relates to guns, and this has to do with prohibiting employment discrimination based upon an applicant or current employee's ownership, storage, transportation, or possession of a firearm. That bill also was discussed but not enacted. This, too, we would anticipate further action in future legislative sessions. I spoke with you over the last 6 months about potential changes in the lottery, and at the very end, the option that had been worked on through the summer was not enacted. We called this lottery option 2A, and I'll briefly describe it to you. It would, in the future, 4 years hence, it would have, had it passed, sort of set a dual award track. And if a student who is not qualified coming out of high school based upon both their ACT score as well as their GPA, they would only receive half of the award, or $2,000. That seemed to have some general agreement this year, but the Lottery Corporation's revenues continued to ramp up. And because they ramped up, it gave some pause for the General Assembly to enact what would be a limiting factor on the lottery when revenues were continuing to grow. So Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, that this also is a continuing story. I still think that there's kind of a deficit in the lottery funds that will at some point in time need to be addressed. And lastly, there was a bill that passed, but the governor vetoed, that impacted higher education. This was a bill that grew out of a particular circumstance at Vanderbilt University related to student organizations. And the bill, as it was written, would prohibit institutions from denying recognition and privileges to student organizations based upon the religious content of the organization's speech. And the bill was enacted, and it would have impacted us, but the governor vetoed it, and it was quite a reach down into a private institution's operation and governing structure, and I think that's the basis for which the governor ended vetoing the legislation. So, Mr. Chairman, 107th General Assembly adjourned, orderly, timely, early, and that concludes my report, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Yes. I have, if I can, I have two questions. One of your questions is on your, the legislation that was passed, legislation Senate Bill 3115. One question that I had on, did that include reservists that come back from overseas or just veterans, active duty?
In the specific license is if you are a current, let's see, honorably just discharged, and your question is, does it include a reservist?
Right, because we do have reservists that are going overseas, fighting for their country, coming back, and then some of them do retire, but they don't get the option to come into school, such as myself.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure the answer to your question. I think it's an honorably discharged veteran, so I don't know that it would actually impact that individual.
Okay. And then
can I double check that just to be sure I'm giving you the proper answer? My initial answer is I don't believe it impacts them.
Okay, thank you. And could you explain a little bit more about the reverse articulation bill?
Sure. Yeah, this is a trend that is not just in Tennessee, but it's other places, and it relates to students who do. Well, it can occur in a number of different ways, but let me give you a typical scenario. A student may do a portion of their work at a community college, happens frequently, and then they go ahead and enroll in a four-year institution, but don't necessarily pass over the threshold for which they get their associate's degree. But they do in their first year at the university, or maybe in their second year at the university, but they don't necessarily go back and get the associate's degree which they have earned. And so the thought in reverse articulation would be that student has done the work sufficient to receive the degree. Let's try to find ways which we can give them that level of certification and that degree when they earn it, because we also know that some of those students also may not finish their four-year work, but they've earned enough credit hours and done the proper work for a degree. They just didn't either think to go back and get it, or they didn't take the effort to go back and get it. So this is a way to increase production of credentials to people who earn it.
Is this going to be an automated process?
Now, the process is going to be something that the institutions will have to work out, and it will almost have to be some form of an automated process in order for it to work. I guess it can work with the individual sort of taking it on themselves, but for it to really produce, you need some type of automation to say this student has clicked over those hours.
Which is a critical component for us in the community college system in terms of being able to benchmark progress of students as well.
Yes.
David, would that also apply to a student that enrolled in a university, say for a year, and then for whatever reason dropped out or decided to transfer to a community college? Could they carry the credits they earned at the university to the community college?
They can.
Thank you.
They can.
Are there other questions to Vice Chancellor Gregory?
We may have an answer to your active duty question. Military veteran means a person who has entered and served honorably in the United States on active duty, National Guard, or active reservist. So, better answer.
All right. Any other questions? Vice Chancellor Gregory, thank you very much for your
Mr.
update.
Chairman.
Is there other business to come before the Committee on Business, Community, and Public Affairs this afternoon? If not, is there a motion to adjourn? Second. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you, Regent Roddy. That concludes the Committee on Business, Community, and Public Affairs. That also concludes our committee meetings for today. There are a few announcements I would like to make, one of which I want to thank Mr. Blankenbecker and Ms. Atkins, Mrs. Braden and Mr. West for being with us today. If your schedules permit, you are invited to attend the meeting, the full board meeting tomorrow, and be a participant in the audience. I would want to say, and I think my colleagues would acknowledge that we sincerely appreciate your involvement today. And in my tenure on the board, and we've had several faculty and student reps, this has been one of the, I will say few if not only occasions that we have had engaged participation by you, and I sincerely appreciate that because that's what this process is designed for, is to make sure that if there are questions and comments, you can participate in the deliberations that we have before us today. So please join me in thanking them for being with us. Thank you. Tomorrow morning, there will be a presentation presented by President Essex. That will start at 9 a.m. in the Born Bloom Theater, which is to my right, correct? Anyway, there will be, yes, and immediately following that presentation at 9:30, we will start the formal June full board meeting. Also, we will be taking photos of group photos of presidents and directors at our September board meeting. As I look for my Sanja, it will be at the September board meeting. Photos will be
the group photos for the presidents and directors.
Yes, or will they be tomorrow?
Face-to-face presidents and directors meeting at the central office in August.
Okay, in August. Lastly, all board members, as you are aware with the current format that we are using, you will receive tonight at the hotel your packets of the minutes of today's committee meetings. Please take time to review those because we will be approving those meetings, minutes, excuse me, in the meetings tomorrow. You can check at the front desk. There will be a packet in each of your name for you to pick up and review. If not, you're going to have to be a speed reader and review them at the meeting because they will be presented for approval. Lastly, I will turn to Chancellor Morgan and ask if there are any comments before we turn the podium or the microphones over to Dr. Essex.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, just a couple of things I'd like to mention real briefly. One is, you may notice that Regent Varlin is not with us today. She is ill and was having a I won't be able to say this correctly, but a stent put in her angioplasty in her carotid artery, I think. We haven't heard from her, but trust that all is well. She had that procedure yesterday morning, I believe. So just keep her, if you would, in your thoughts. Also, Helen Vose. Helen Vose is the internal auditor that works for the TTCs, is actually from Colorado Springs, and her family is kind of engaged in the fires in Colorado Springs, so kind of keep them in your thoughts as well. And on a little bit happier note, they're doing fine, but they're just kind of right out there in the middle of it. On a happier note, today actually is Warren Nichols' birthday. And and I just wanted to everybody know that Vice Chancellor Nichols is older than I am today. So congratulations to Warren. So that's it, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chancellor Morgan. Dr. Essex, any announcements or directions for us? Thank you, Dr. Essex. Any further business? Hearing none, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second? Meeting's adjourned. Thank you all.